Hey there, welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I woke up that morning feeling disoriented, the way you sometimes do when sleep hasn't fully let go of you yet. The room felt quiet, but not peaceful. It was that strange, in-between state where your mind is still foggy and your body hasn't quite caught up. I remember feeling a gentle pressure on my arm and opening my eyes to see my dog, Honey, standing beside the bed. She had one paw resting on me, like she was trying to wake me up on purpose. Her face looked confused, her ears slightly back, her eyes moving around the room as if she was trying to make sense of something she didn't understand. It reminded me of how people look when they wake up from a deep sleep and don't immediately know where they are. That hazy, unfocused confusion. That's exactly how she looked. And honestly, that's how I felt too. I mumbled her name and asked her what was wrong, my voice still thick with sleep. As I did, I noticed she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring toward the bedroom door, then glancing around, alert but uncertain. That's when I heard it. There were loud noises coming from downstairs. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in the easiest way possible. We had cats, and cats are experts at knocking things over for no reason at all. Shelves, counters, tables, it didn't matter. So my first thought was that they were being their usual destructive selves. I almost laughed it off in my head, even though my heart had started to beat a little faster. But then something didn't add up. I quickly realized that all the cats were accounted for. None of them were downstairs. None of them could have made that kind of noise. The sounds came again, louder this time. Not a single crash, but multiple movements, things being opened, things being shifted, the kind of sounds that have weight and intention behind them. That fog in my head disappeared instantly. A cold wave of fear washed over me as the realization hit. This wasn't something innocent. This wasn't an animal. Someone else was in the house. My husband had already left for work that morning. He was usually gone by that time, and I worked from home. I'm a writer, and I also did PC repair work on the side, so it wasn't unusual for me to still be asleep or just waking up around 9 or 10 in the morning. Whoever was downstairs clearly thought the house was empty. That realization alone made my stomach drop. I stayed completely still for a moment, listening. The sounds continued. Drawers opening, footsteps. The unmistakable noise of people moving around freely in a space they didn't belong in. Honey stood stiff beside me, her body tense now, her confusion replaced by alertness. She didn't bark, she didn't growl, she just listened, the same way I was, trying to understand what was happening. That's when the fear really set in. I wasn't just scared. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I was upstairs, half awake, unprepared, while unknown people were moving through my home below me. There was no warning, no build-up, just the sudden knowledge that my safety had already been breached. Later, I would find out that there were 3 of them. They had broken into the house sometime between 9 and 10 in the morning. They had done their research. They knew schedules. They knew when people were usually home and when they weren't. And they knew my husband left for work. They assumed the house would be empty after that. In their minds, it was a safe target. So they made themselves comfortable. They went through my things like they owned the place. They took my collection of old iPhone boxes, collectibles, anything they thought might be valuable or easy to resell. They opened drawers, cabinets, closets. They even opened the refrigerator and took a can of Pepsi. That detail still sticks with me because it shows just how relaxed they felt. They weren't rushing, they weren't panicking, they were thirsty enough to help themselves to my fridge, all while I was upstairs in bed. At some point, they heard me move. The moment my feet touched the floor upstairs, the entire situation changed. I didn't even have to say anything. Just the sound of me getting out of bed was enough. They immediately dropped what they were doing. They didn't confront me. They didn't check to see who I was. They didn't hesitate. They ran. They bolted out the back door and into the small forested area behind the house. I didn't see them. I didn't hear them leave directly. I just noticed the sudden absence of sound. The house went quiet in a way that felt wrong, like the calm after something violent, narrowly missed happening. I stayed frozen for a while after that, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my chest. Honey stayed close, pressed against me. I didn't go downstairs right away. I was too scared. Every part of me was bracing for the possibility that someone might still be there. When I finally did gather the courage to look, the signs were everywhere. Things were out of place. Drawers were open. Items were missing. The refrigerator door had been opened. The house felt violated, like a boundary had been crossed that couldn't be undone. It wasn't just about the things they took. It was about the fact that strangers had been inside my home, touching my belongings, walking through my space, while I slept upstairs completely unaware. The police came later, and that's when I learned the full scope of what had happened. Those same 3 men had broken into several homes in the area. They didn't choose places randomly. They watched, they researched, they learned people's routines and schedules. They struck when they believed no one would be home. When the police sent out a helicopter to search the area, they found stolen items scattered all through the forest. TVS, phones, collectibles, loot from multiple houses. The men had dropped everything and run the moment they realized someone was home. I still don't know what their plan really was. Maybe they thought they could come back later. Maybe they panicked. Maybe they just wanted to escape as fast as possible. All I know is that they disappeared into the trees and left chaos behind them. After everything was over, after the police left, after the house was quiet again, the fear didn't go away. That's the part people don't always understand. It wasn't just scary in the moment. It stayed with me. The idea that 3 people were inside my house without my knowledge, that they were close enough to hear me move, that they could have chosen to do something much worse. It settled deep into my mind and refused to leave. I've been attacked before, over absolutely nothing, and I worked through that trauma. I healed. I moved on. But this experience was different. This was a brutal reminder of how fragile safety really is. If those men had wanted to hurt me, if they had decided to go upstairs instead of running, there would have been nothing I could do. That realization hit me hard, long after the immediate danger was gone. Since then, I've done everything people tell you to do. I installed security cameras. I changed routines. I went through the entire list of safety ideas, trying to rebuild a sense of control. On the surface, things feel safer now. Rationally, I know I'm more prepared. But fear doesn't always listen to logic. I still get nightmares sometimes. Dreams where I wake up and hear footsteps. Dreams where I can't move fast enough. Dreams where I'm back in that moment, hazy and confused, trying to understand why something feels wrong before my brain catches up. Waking up to multiple people in your home, even after they're gone, changes you. It takes away that innocent sense of safety you have when you sleep. That belief that home is automatically safe just because you're inside it. Once that's gone, it doesn't fully come back. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. Waking up like that, realizing strangers are inside your space, knowing how close you were to something far worse, It's terrifying in a way that's hard to describe unless you've lived it, and honestly, not recommended. Several years ago, I had what felt like the easiest job in the world. I worked occasional overnight babysitting shifts for a family across town. The parents both worked late night hours, and their son was 9 years old, already responsible and quiet. The kind of kid who went to bed early without a fight. By the time I arrived each night, usually around 11, he would already be asleep. My job was less about babysitting and more about being a legal adult presence in the house. Since he was under 13, he couldn't be left home alone overnight. All I really had to do was stay there, sleep in the guest room, and make sure nothing catastrophic happened. No cooking, no homework help, no tantrums. Just exist under the same roof. It felt like free money. The only drawback was the neighborhood. It wasn't the kind of place where you lingered outside after dark. The streetlights flickered more often than they worked, and most houses had bars on the windows. There was always a sense that you should keep your head down, walk quickly, and mind your business. I'd been working there for over a year, though, and nothing had ever happened. The parents were kind, the kid was sweet, and the routine was so predictable it almost felt boring. A few nights before Halloween, I got a call from the mom earlier than usual. Her voice was tight, rushed. She said she had an emergency at work and needed to leave immediately. She asked if I could come as fast as I could. I was on the other side of town, but I told her I'd be there in about 45 minutes. She hesitated and admitted she'd already left. Her son was alone and would be for about 35 or 40 minutes until I arrived. It was the first time that had ever happened. She sounded guilty even saying it, but whatever the situation was, it was serious enough that she had no choice. I told her it was fine, and that I was already grabbing my keys. The drive over felt longer than usual. The sky was heavy and dark, the kind of night where the air feels thick and quiet. I kept checking the clock, calculating how long the boy had been alone. I knew he'd probably sleep through the whole thing, but the idea still made me uneasy. When I finally pulled onto their street, the neighborhood looked as worn and shadowy as ever. I parked in front of the house, engine ticking as it cooled, and sat there for a second gathering my bag and phone. That's when I noticed the cat. It slipped into view from the edge of my vision, silent and smooth. When I stepped out of the car, it was suddenly right there, weaving around my legs like it had known me forever. It rubbed against my ankles, purring loudly, tail flicking in tight little curves. I froze for a second, surprised. This family didn't own a cat. The boy was severely allergic. In all the time I'd worked there, I had never once seen a stray hang around their yard either. Still, it didn't seem threatening, just affectionate. I laughed softly and kept walking, but the cat followed, pressing against my shins as I went up the short path to the gate. As I reached the front fence, headlights washed over the street. A white van rolled up and stopped a few yards away. It was the kind of van that instantly sets off alarms in your head. No logos, no windows in the back, just blank white metal. The back doors rattled open, and two men hopped out. They looked rough, jumpy. One of them called out, asking if I knew where the nearest gas station was. I pointed down the street and gave quick directions, eager to get inside and end the interaction. The driver leaned out of his window, smiling too wide, and asked if I could just hop in and show them. Every instinct in my body screamed no. Before I could even form the words, the cat exploded into motion. It shot out from behind me like a missile, a blur of fur and teeth. It darted under the fence and launched itself straight at one of the men. The sound it made was horrific, a shrieking, guttural scream that didn't sound like it came from something so small. The cat climbed his leg in a flash, claws digging in, shredding fabric and skin. The man howled and stumbled backward, trying to shake it off. His friends started yelling too, swatting at the air uselessly. The cat clung to him like it was glued there, tearing into him with a fury that felt almost purposeful. The entire scene lasted seconds, but it felt stretched out and surreal. The men panicked. They dove back into the van, slamming doors half shut, and peeled away from the curb with tires screeching. The cat dropped to the pavement and landed lightly, watching them disappear. Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, it trotted back up the path and sat neatly at my feet. I stood there shaking, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The cat looked up at me and blinked slowly. I crouched and reached out, half expecting it to attack me too. Instead, it leaned into my hand, purring, warm and solid and real. I scratched behind its ears, my fingers trembling. After a moment, it slipped away, bounding toward the backyard and vanishing into the darkness. I went inside in a daze. I locked every door and window, checked on the boy, still asleep, breathing softly, and sat on the edge of the guest bed, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I replayed it over and over in my head. The van, the men, the way the driver had smiled, the cat's sudden violence. My stomach twisted when I realized how easily I could have stepped closer, how easily I could have been pulled inside that van. A week later, the news broke. A woman around my age, same general build, had gone missing. The reports mentioned witnesses seeing a white, unmarked painter's van in the area. My blood went cold when I read it. I called the police immediately and gave my statement. I described the van, the men, the location, everything I could remember. I left out the part about the cat. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. They took my information, thanked me, and that was the last I heard. I never found out if my report helped or if those men were ever caught. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brushed against something terrible that night. The timing was too close. The similarity was too exact. If that cat hadn't intervened, I might have been the one on the news. I kept watching the neighborhood every time I returned for work, hoping to see the cat again. I never did. Not once. No stray fur darting between houses. No glowing eyes in the dark. It was as if it had appeared for that single moment and then dissolved back into the city. I told the boy's mother eventually. She listened quietly and then said she believed it was a guardian angel. I laughed it off at the time. I've never been someone who leans towards supernatural explanations. I like logic, evidence, things you can point to and measure, but I also don't have a better answer. A random stray cat chose that exact second to defend me with surgical precision and then vanished from the area forever. It sounds absurd when I say it out loud, but it's the truth as I experienced it. Every year when Halloween approaches, the memory comes back sharp and vivid. I can still hear the cats scream, still see the van speeding away, still feel the weight of what almost happened pressing down on my chest. I think about how fragile safety is, how a normal night can tilt toward disaster without warning. And I think about that small, furious animal that stood between me and something I might not have escaped. I don't know what it was. A coincidence. A stray with perfect timing. Something stranger. All I know is that I walked away unharmed, and somewhere in the back of my mind I carry a quiet gratitude toward a cat that appeared out of nowhere, fought like a demon, and then disappeared like it had never been there at all. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself scanning quiet streets for a familiar shape, half hoping I'll see that fluffy silhouette again, sitting calmly under a streetlight like a secret I was lucky enough to survive. When I was a kid, we lived next door to a man who always made me uncomfortable, even before we knew what he was really doing. At the time, I didn't have the words to explain why he felt wrong, only that something about him never sat well with me. He watched our house more than a normal neighbor ever should, He lingered, he stared, he asked strange questions. As a child, I brushed it off because adults around me didn't seem overly alarmed, and when you're young, you trust that if something were truly dangerous, someone older would step in. As I grew up, the truth slowly came out, and when it did, it was far worse than anything I could have imagined. We eventually learned that this neighbor had been spying on my family for a long time. He wasn't just being nosy or invasive in a casual way. He had been actively recording our conversations, and he had been taking photographs of my mom without her knowing, catching moments when she thought she was unobserved. The idea that someone had been watching us like that, quietly and obsessively, was deeply disturbing. We didn't find out on our own. His wife and the rest of his family eventually discovered what he had been doing, and they were just as horrified. They filed for a restraining order against him, and during the legal process, law enforcement examined his computer. That was when everything came to light, the recordings, the photos, the proof that he had been monitoring our lives without our knowledge or consent. It was undeniable. Seeing how real it all was changed everything. After the restraining order was granted, his family left. The house next door became quieter, but the damage had already been done. Knowing that someone had invaded our privacy in such an extreme way left a lasting sense of unease. Even though he no longer lived there, his presence felt like it lingered in the air around our home. About 6 months after the court case ended, there was a night that still stands out in my memory with painful clarity. My parents were away, and I was home alone with just my dog. By then, I was old enough to stay by myself, and I had done it many times before without any issues. I locked the doors like I always did, turned off the lights, and went to bed thinking it would be just another quiet night. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by my dog barking. Not normal barking, not the kind where dogs respond to distant noises or other animals outside. This was intense, desperate. The kind of barking that makes your heart start racing before your brain has time to catch up. It sounded like something was very wrong. I sat up in bed, fully awake within seconds. My dog wasn't just standing in one place barking, she was frantic. She ran down the hallway, barking at one door, then raced to another. She ran up and down the stairs, nails clicking loudly against the floor. She stopped at every door in the house, barking like her life depended on it. I had never seen her act like that before. Fear settled into my chest, heavy and cold. I grabbed my phone and turned on the lights, trying to steady myself. I told myself to be logical, to stay calm. Dogs can sense things we can't, but that doesn't always mean there's a real threat. Still, I couldn't ignore how extreme her behavior was. I forced myself to get out of bed and started checking the house. I went to every door and checked every lock. Front door, back door, side door, all locked. I checked the windows, locked. I went room by room, scanning corners, closets, and dark spaces. I even checked the pantry, feeling a little ridiculous but too anxious to skip anything. The house appeared empty. Nothing was out of place. There were no signs of a break-in. My dog continued to pace and bark for a while, then slowly started to calm down. Eventually she settled near me, still alert but quieter. Exhaustion began to creep in. My adrenaline faded, replaced by confusion and fatigue. I told myself that maybe she had heard something outside, maybe a stray animal. Maybe she was reacting to a sound I couldn't hear. Trying to convince myself that everything was fine, I went back to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually I drifted off. The next day, I learned what had actually happened that night. Our old neighbor, the same man who had spied on my family and terrified us for years, had come back. Despite the restraining order and the legal consequences, he returned to the neighborhood. That night, while I was home alone, he broke into his old house next door. He stole several items, including the computer that held all the recordings and photographs of my family. When I heard this, my stomach dropped. Suddenly, my dog's behavior made perfect sense. She hadn't been reacting to nothing. She hadn't been imagining things. She had sensed him nearby. A man who had already proven himself to be dangerous, obsessive, and unstable. What made it even more chilling was what we knew about him beyond the spying. When he still lived next to us, he had constantly tried to provoke my dad into fights. He would challenge him, taunt him, and act aggressively for no reason. He loved talking about his guns, boasting about how many he owned and how he wasn't afraid to use them. Even back then, his behavior felt unhinged. Realizing that he had been so close that night while I was alone and asleep is something I still struggle to fully process. If I hadn't checked the locks, if I had ignored my dog, if one door or window had been left unsecured, I don't know what might have happened. And that's the part that truly terrifies me. Not what did happen, but what could have happened. He wasn't just a burglar looking for random items. He was trying to retrieve evidence of crimes he had already committed. Desperate people do unpredictable things, and he had already shown that he had no respect for boundaries, laws, or other people's safety. When I think back on that night, I don't remember seeing anything strange or hearing footsteps. I remember my dog, her fear, her urgency, her refusal to settle until she was sure the house was secure. She understood something I didn't yet know. Animals don't second-guess their instincts. They react. It's hard not to wonder what would have happened if she hadn't alerted me. It's hard not to replay the possibilities in your mind, even years later. I know for certain that nothing good would have come from an encounter with that man. The thought alone is enough to make my chest tighten. That experience changed the way I think about safety, awareness, or an instinct. It also deepened my trust in animals in a way that words can't fully explain. My dog didn't just bark, she protected me. She gave me a warning before I even understood there was something to be afraid of. Even now, long after we've moved on and built new lives elsewhere, that night stays with me. It's a reminder that real-life horror doesn't always come with shadows or strange noises. Sometimes it comes in the form of people you already know are dangerous, people who live right next door, quietly watching and waiting. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and something truly terrible is a locked door, a moment of caution, and a dog who refuses to stay silent. When I was younger, there was one night that stayed with me in a way I didn't fully understand until I got older. My mum and dad had gone out for the evening. Nothing unusual, just one of those nights where they trusted that everything would be fine and that I would be safe at home. I remember the house feeling quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that feels heavier when you are young and alone. The lights were on, the doors were locked, and everything felt normal enough. But there was still that small, uneasy feeling you get when you know you are the only human in the house. Our dog, Cooper, was outside in the garden that night. He was a good dog, loyal, alert, and usually very calm, unless there was a real reason for him not to be. He wasn't the kind of dog who barked at nothing. If Cooper made noise, it usually meant something was going on. I was inside, doing my own thing, when I suddenly heard him barking. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Dogs bark all the time, especially if they hear a noise or see a cat or something moving in the distance. I figured maybe he wanted water or was annoyed about something small. I decided to go downstairs to pour some water into his bowl. The routine felt automatic, something I had done countless times before. I walked down the stairs, listening to his barking echo through the house. As I got closer to the back door, the barking didn't stop. In fact, it sounded sharper, louder, more urgent than usual, but I still didn't think too much of it. I assumed once I opened the door and spoke to him, he would calm down like he always did. I reached the back door and placed my hand on the handle. The key was already in the lock, and I remember turning it slightly, just enough to feel the metal move. That was the exact moment everything changed. Cooper completely lost it. His barking exploded into something I had never heard from him before. It wasn't normal barking. It was violent, frantic, and filled with pure aggression. He started growling deeply, the kind of growl that comes from somewhere primal, like every instinct in his body was screaming danger. It shocked me so badly that I froze. I had never heard Cooper sound like that in my entire life. This was a dog who was friendly, protective but gentle, and suddenly he sounded like he was ready to attack whatever was on the other side of that door. The barking wasn't directed at me. It was aimed outward, toward the garden, toward something I couldn't see. His body language, even through the door, felt like a warning. Every instinct in me told me to stop. I pulled my hand away from the door immediately and stepped back. My heart started pounding, and for the first time that night, fear fully set in. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. Cooper did not want me to open that door. It felt less like a suggestion and more like an order. Whatever was outside, he was trying to protect me from it. I stood there for a few moments, listening to him bark and growl, not daring to move closer again. The house suddenly felt very small and very quiet, except for the sound of Cooper going absolutely wild outside. Eventually, I backed away completely and went back upstairs. I didn't open the door. I didn't pour the water. I just stayed inside, shaken, replaying the sound of his growl over and over in my head. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me tense. I kept thinking about how close I was to opening that door and stepping outside. The thought made my stomach twist. I didn't know what Cooper saw or heard, but I trusted him more than my own judgment in that moment. He had stopped me for a reason, even if I didn't understand it yet. The next morning, when my mum and dad came home, I told them everything. I explained how Cooper had been barking, how I had gone down to give him water, and how he completely lost his mind the moment I touched the door. I told them I had never heard him sound like that before, and that it scared me enough to back away. They listened carefully, and unlike some adults who brush off things kids say, they took me seriously. My dad decided to go outside and have a look around the garden. At first, everything looked normal. Then he went down toward the bottom of the garden, near the fence. That's when he found them. Footprints in the ground, clear signs that someone had been there recently. Some of the flowers were trampled, crushed in a way that didn't happen naturally. It looked exactly like someone had climbed over the fence and landed there. Seeing that confirmed something none of us wanted to say out loud. Someone had been in our garden that night. Someone close enough to the house that Cooper had noticed them and reacted instantly. Someone who might have been watching, waiting, or planning something. The idea made my skin crawl. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I had ignored Cooper and opened that door. To this day, I don't know exactly what that person intended. Maybe they were just passing through. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they were planning to break in. There's no way to know for sure, but what I do know is that my dog knew something was wrong. He sensed danger before I ever did, and he reacted with everything he had to keep me safe. As I've gotten older, I've thought about that night many times. At the time, I was confused and scared, but now I see it differently. Dogs don't question their instincts. They don't overthink or second-guess themselves the way humans do. Cooper didn't need proof. He didn't need to see a face clearly or understand intent. He felt that something wasn't right, and that was enough. That moment taught me a deep respect for animals and their ability to protect the people they love. Cooper wasn't just barking. He was warning me. He was telling me, in the only way he could, to stay inside and stay safe. And I listened. That decision might have saved me from something far worse. Even now, I still don't know for sure how close I came to real danger that night. But I do know that I will always trust that dog's instincts. Cooper did his job perfectly. He guarded the house, he guarded me, and he didn't let me walk into something that could have gone very badly. Thanks, Cooper. Rest in peace. One night when I was about 14 years old, my parents left the house to go to a dinner party. It wasn't unusual for them to go out, but I had always been an anxious kid. Being home alone made my imagination run wild, especially after dark. As soon as they told me they were leaving, that familiar nervous feeling settled into my chest, the kind that makes you feel like something bad is just waiting to happen. As they were getting ready to go, I followed them through the house, double-checking everything. I locked all the doors and windows, even the ones I knew were already locked. I turned on lights in almost every room, because darkness made everything feel worse. When they finally left and the house went quiet, I stood there for a moment, listening, making sure I hadn't missed anything. The silence felt heavier than usual, or like the house had changed the second they walked out the door. I tried to distract myself. I made a bowl of ramen noodles and carried it upstairs to my bedroom. My room felt like the safest place in the house, mostly because it was familiar and small. I didn't sit on my bed. Instead, I sat on the floor with my back pressed against the side of it, facing the TV. I turned the volume up a little louder than usual, not because I was really watching, but because the noise helped fill the space. My pet stayed close to me. My dog was huge, around 120 pounds, a lab and Akita mix. He was goofy and gentle, the kind of dog that never seemed to take anything seriously. My cat was there too, sitting near me on the floor, calm and relaxed. Having them with me helped. It made me feel less alone. For a while, everything was normal. Then, without any warning, both of them reacted at the exact same time. My dog shot up so fast it startled me. My cat did the same, both of them snapping their attention toward my open bedroom door. The hallway outside was dark, but I could see it clearly from where I was sitting. What scared me immediately was their body language. The hair along their backs was standing straight up, every bit of it. My dog's posture changed completely. He wasn't playful or curious. He was rigid, focused, alert in a way I had never seen before. Then he started to growl. It wasn't a low, casual growl. It was deep, loud, and full of something I didn't recognize. He snarled, showing his teeth, and the sound that came out of him made my stomach drop. This was a dog who had never acted aggressively in his life. I had never heard him make a sound like that before, and it terrified me. Before I could even react, he moved closer to me. He pressed the length of his body against my side, pushing me back until I was wedged against the bed. He positioned himself between me and the doorway, his eyes never leaving the hall. It was clear he wasn't just scared, he was protecting me. Whatever he thought he saw, he believed it was dangerous. My cat, on the other hand, did what cats do best. He took one look at the situation and bolted. He disappeared down the hall without a second thought, leaving me alone with a massive, growling dog pressed against me. I remember thinking, not for the last time, that my cat was absolutely useless in a crisis. I stared at the doorway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty. No movement, no shadows, no sound. I could see everything clearly, and yet my dog was reacting like there was a serious threat standing right in front of us. I tried to tell myself there had to be a logical explanation, maybe a noise from outside, maybe something shifted in the house. But none of that explained the intensity of his reaction. For about 30 seconds he stayed like that, growling, snarling, completely focused. Every muscle in his body was tense. I barely breathed, afraid that even the smallest movement might make things worse. I whispered his name softly, trying to calm him, but he didn't look at me. He didn't even seem to hear me. Then, slowly, something changed. The growling stopped. His body relaxed just a little. He didn't move away from me right away, but I could feel the tension easing. It was strange. Like whatever he thought was, there had either left or no longer mattered. After another moment, he shifted and gave me enough space to move. I sat up carefully, still shaking. What struck me most was how aware he suddenly seemed. It was like a switch had flipped, and now he was fully tuned into me instead of whatever had scared him before. He looked at me directly, his eyes calm but alert, like he was waiting for instructions. I talked to him quietly, telling him it was okay and asking him to go look. I half expected him to ignore me or act confused, but he didn't. He stood up and walked to the doorway, slow and cautious. He looked down the hallway, sniffed the air, and paused there for a moment. Then he turned back to me, his expression relaxed, like he was telling me everything was fine. That gave me just enough confidence to keep going. I asked him to check my mom's room next. Again, he listened. He walked down the hall, went into her bedroom and looked around. When he came back, he seemed calm, almost proud, like he was reporting that the area was clear. We went through the rest of the house together, room by room. He searched every space, sniffing corners, checking doorways, moving with purpose. But we never found anything. No open doors, no broken windows, no signs that anyone or anything had been there. The house was exactly the way I had left it. And yet, the fear didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. The fact that there was no explanation made everything worse. Once we finished checking the house, I went back upstairs and closed myself into my bedroom. I grabbed every knife I could find from the kitchen and brought them up with me, my hands shaking as I did. I locked the door, even though I knew it wouldn't stop much if something really wanted to get in. My dog stayed close, lying next to me, alert but calm. My cat eventually reappeared, acting like nothing had happened at all. I stayed awake the rest of the night. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt threatening. I kept replaying the moment in my head, watching my dog's reaction over and over again. Animals don't imagine things the way people do. They don't scare themselves for no reason. Whatever he had seen, whatever had made him react like that, felt real to him. My parents came home later that night, and I didn't tell them everything. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. I just said I had gotten scared and stayed in my room. They brushed it off, assuming I had just worked myself up, but I never forgot that night. Even now, years later, it still sends chills down my spine. I can still hear that growl, feel the pressure of his body against mine, remember the way he guarded me without hesitation. I don't know what was in that doorway. I don't know if it was something supernatural or something explainable that I'll never understand. All I know is that my dog believed I was in danger, and that's what makes it impossible to forget. When I lived in my old house, nights were never completely quiet. Even when everything looked still and calm, there was always a strange feeling in the air, like the house itself was awake while everyone else slept. It wasn't something I noticed right away. At first, it was just small things that didn't make sense, things I brushed off because they seemed too minor to matter. But over time, those small things added up, and they became impossible to ignore. The attic door was the first thing that really stood out. It was located at the end of a narrow hallway, slightly above eye level, with a pull-down ladder attached to it. That attic was not a place anyone liked to go. It wasn't finished or cleaned up. and the insulation was still exposed, sticking out of the walls in uneven clumps. The air up there was dusty and heavy, and the ladder itself wasn't very stable. Because of that, we were always careful about it. The attic door was never left open, not even cracked. We made a point of keeping it closed and locked at all times. That's why it was so strange when I started waking up at night and finding it unlocked. The first time it happened, I thought it must have been a mistake. Maybe someone forgot to secure it properly during the day. Maybe I was remembering wrong. I stood there in the hallway in the middle of the night, half asleep, staring at the attic door, trying to convince myself that this was normal. The ladder wasn't down, but the lock was undone, just slightly loose, as if someone had recently touched it. I locked it again and went back to bed, telling myself not to overthink it. But it kept happening. Some nights, I would wake up for no clear reason, that same sudden feeling pulling me out of sleep. My room would be dark and quiet, and for a moment, I wouldn't remember where I was. Then I'd hear a soft sound from the hallway, like wood shifting or something lightly brushing against the ceiling. I'd get up, already feeling uneasy, and walk out to check. Almost every time, the attic door would be unlocked again. It didn't matter how carefully we checked it before going to bed. It didn't matter if someone double-checked the latch. By morning, it would sometimes be fine, as if nothing had happened. But at night, it was different. Night was when the house felt wrong. Then there were the times when I saw him. At first, I didn't take it seriously at all. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see a figure standing near the attic door at the end of the hallway. It looked like a person, tall and still, just standing there in the shadows. My heart would jump, but then I'd rub my eyes, blink a few times, and the figure would be gone. I told myself it was just my imagination, or sleep paralysis, or my eyes adjusting to the dark. That's what people always say, and it made sense enough for me to accept it, except it didn't stop. I saw him more than once, always at night, always near the attic door. Sometimes he looked closer, sometimes farther away. Sometimes I couldn't make out his face at all, just the outline of a body standing where no one should be. Every time I would blink, rub my eyes or turn on a light, and he would disappear. There was never a sound when he left, no footsteps, no movement, just gone. After a while, I started calling him Walter. I don't know why I chose that name. It just felt right. Giving him a name made him feel less frightening, less unknown. It was easier to say Walter than to think of him as something dark and unexplained. Once I named him, he became almost familiar, like an unwanted roommate rather than a terrifying presence. Walter wasn't nice, but he wasn't violent either. He never tried to hurt anyone. He never chased me or spoke to me or did anything dramatic. Instead, he did small, irritating things that slowly wore me down. I would leave something on my desk, and the next day it would be gone, only to turn up somewhere else later. Objects would be moved just enough for me to notice. Keys wouldn't be where I left them. Books would be stacked differently. Sometimes something would go missing for days and then reappear in plain sight, exactly where I had already checked. At first, I blamed myself. I thought I was forgetful. I thought I was careless. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to explain. The house wasn't big, and I knew my routines. I knew where I put my things. And yet, it kept happening. Walter felt mean. Not in a loud or aggressive way, but in a quiet, petty way, like he enjoyed messing with me just enough to let me know he was there. Sometimes I would feel watched while I was alone in my room, that same uncomfortable pressure on the back of my neck. I'd turn around quickly, half expecting to see him standing there, but the room would always be empty. The attic door became a symbol of him. Every time I saw it unlocked, my stomach would drop. It felt like proof that he was active, that he had been moving around while everyone else slept. I tried to avoid looking at it at night. I tried not to think about what might be up there in the darkness, surrounded by dust and insulation and silence. There were nights when I talked to him, quietly, under my breath. I'd say things like, "Stop it," or "Leave my stuff alone," even though I felt ridiculous doing it. Part of me hoped that acknowledging him would make things calmer. Another part of me was terrified that if he really was something real, talking to him might make things worse. Nothing ever escalated. That was the strangest part. He never crossed a line. He never appeared in full light. He never followed me or made himself truly known. It was always just enough to keep me uneasy, just enough to make me doubt myself. As time went on, I learned to live with it. The fear dulled into something closer to annoyance, mixed with resignation. I still didn't like it, but I stopped panicking every time something moved or went missing. Walter became part of the background of that house. Like a bad habit or a crack in the wall, you learn to ignore. Eventually we moved out. The day we left that house for the last time, I remember standing in the hallway and looking up at the attic door. It was locked, just like it should be. The house felt empty in a different way then, quieter but also heavier, like it was holding on to something it didn't want to lose. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything at all. I just walked out and closed the door behind me. In the new house, things were normal. My belongings stayed where I put them. Doors stayed locked. I never woke up feeling watched. I never saw anyone standing in the shadows. Life went on, and slowly, Walter faded into something that felt more like a strange memory than a real experience. But even now, years later, I still think about him sometimes. Not with fear, exactly, but with a quiet sense of unease, because I don't know what he was, or why he chose that house, or why he focused on me. I don't know if he was just a trick of a tired mind, or something else entirely. All I know is that for a while, in that old house, I wasn't alone at night. And whatever Walter was, he made sure I never forgot that. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. My first apartment was not a place I ever felt truly comfortable in, even during the day. It was a low-income building, the kind of place people ended up in when they didn't have many other options. Over the years, a lot of bad things had happened there. People talked quietly about overdoses, about ambulances showing up late at night, about neighbors who moved in and never seemed to move out again. I tried not to think about that history too much, but the walls had a way of holding on to it. The air always felt heavy, like the building remembered everything that had happened inside it. Weird things started happening almost as soon as I moved in. At first, they were easy to ignore. Cabinets would be open when I was sure I had closed them. Pots and pans would fall out for no clear reason, clattering loudly and making my heart jump. I told myself it was just old hinges, uneven shelves, the normal quirks of an old, poorly maintained apartment. But it kept happening, and not just once in a while. It felt constant, like the apartment was never completely still. The strangest part was the sound. I had a surround sound system set up in the living room, and there were nights when I would hear voices coming through it even though everything was turned off. Not static, not radio noise, but voices. They were faint and unclear, like someone talking in another room with the door closed. I could never make out words, but the tone was unmistakably human. Every time it happened, I would grab the remote, check the system, unplug it, and still feel uneasy long after the sound stopped. After a while, I noticed a pattern. and almost all of the strange things seemed to happen around the same time. Around 2 in the morning, the apartment felt different. The air felt heavier, the silence felt louder, and the small, unexplained things happened more often. Once I realized that, I started changing my routine. I would try to be asleep before 2 a.m., hoping that if I wasn't awake to notice anything, it wouldn't affect me as much. It felt childish, but it also felt necessary. Sleep became my way of hiding. Most nights that worked, but one night it didn't. I stayed up later than usual, sitting in my bedroom with the lights low. I don't remember exactly why I stayed awake. Maybe I was distracted, or maybe I just didn't feel tired. The clock crept past 2 a.m., and I remember noticing the time and feeling a small knot of tension form in my stomach. I told myself I was being silly. Nothing bad had ever actually happened to me. I was just letting the stories and the atmosphere get into my head. I lay back on the bed and stared up at the ceiling, trying to relax. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved slowly across the ceiling, stretching and shifting in a way that immediately caught my attention. My first thought was the tree outside. There was a large tree near my window, and when the wind blew, its branches sometimes cast strange shapes on the walls and ceiling. I focused on that explanation and forced myself to believe it. But then the room got colder. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't like the air conditioner kicking on or a draft slipping under the door. The temperature dropped enough that I could feel it on my skin. Goosebumps rose along my arms, and I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. The warmth that had been there just moments before was gone, replaced by a sharp, uncomfortable chill. That was when my dog woke up. She was a pug, small and stubborn, and she had been sleeping peacefully at the end of the blanket. She lifted her head suddenly, like something had snapped her out of a deep sleep. Her body went stiff, and she started to growl low in her throat. It wasn't a playful sound. It wasn't curiosity. It was a warning. Her eyes were locked on the bedroom door, and she didn't look away. My heart started to pound. Animals sense things we don't, and I knew that. I whispered her name softly, trying to calm her, but she didn't react. She stayed focused, tense, alert, like she was watching something I couldn't see. A few seconds later, something moved. What crossed the room didn't look solid. It wasn't a person or a shadow this time. It looked like a spark or a small ball of light, bright and quick. It moved fast, cutting across the space between the door and the open closet. The light was sharp and white, almost electric, and it left a brief trail behind it as it moved. Before I could even react, my dog jumped off the bed. She ran straight toward it, barking and chasing it like she would chase a toy or a bug. The light darted into the open closet, and then, suddenly, it was gone. There was a flash, bright and sudden, like a camera going off right in front of my eyes. Then the room was dark and silent again. I sat there frozen, my breath caught in my chest. My dog stood still for a moment, staring into the closet. Then, just as suddenly as she had reacted, she seemed to lose interest. She turned around, climbed back onto the bed, circled a few times and lay down again. Within minutes, she was asleep, breathing softly like nothing had happened at all. I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment for the rest of the night, turning on lights, checking rooms, opening and closing doors. Everything looked normal. The closet was empty, nothing was disturbed. The cold faded slowly, leaving behind a deep sense of unease that wouldn't go away. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed too dark. I watched the clock crawl toward morning, counting the minutes until the sun came up. When morning finally arrived, I felt exhausted but relieved. Daylight made the apartment feel less threatening, like it had lost some of its power. I tried to convince myself that the night had been a mix of stress, imagination, and coincidence. I needed that explanation to function. Then my son spoke. He was 3 years old at the time, still young enough that his imagination was vivid and his understanding of the world was simple. We were sitting at the breakfast table, and I was trying to act normal, trying to push the night out of my mind. He was eating quietly when he suddenly looked up at me and started talking, casually, like he was describing a toy or a cartoon. He said he had seen a man in his room. My stomach dropped. He described the man as having a beard and wearing a hat. He said the man was standing there, watching him. He didn't sound scared. He sounded matter-of-fact, like it was just something that had happened. I asked him questions, trying not to let my voice shake. Where was the man standing? What was he doing? When did he see him? Well, his answers were simple and consistent. I checked everything again after that. All the doors were locked. All the windows were closed. We were on the second floor. There was no logical way anyone could have been inside the apartment without us knowing. There were no signs of a break-in, no noises, nothing. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The shadow on the ceiling, the sudden cold, my dog's reaction, the ball of light, the flash. And now my son's description of a man who didn't belong there. None of it fit neatly into a rational explanation, and that was the worst part. We didn't stay in that apartment forever. When we finally moved out, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't realized I was missing. The new place felt lighter, quieter, safer. The strange events stopped. My dog slept peacefully every night. My son never mentioned seeing anyone in his room again. But even now, years later, the memory still gives me chills. I don't know what happened in that apartment. I don't know if it was something tied to the building's past, or something drawn to the people living there, or something I'll never be able to explain. All I know is that it felt real, in a way that imagination alone never does. It left an imprint, a feeling that hasn't faded with time. And every now and then, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the room feels just a little too quiet, I remember that apartment. I remember the cold, the light, the look on my dog's face, and the calm way my son described a man who shouldn't have been there. And no matter how much time passes, that feeling comes back, sharp and familiar, reminding me that some experiences stay with you forever, even when you leave the place where they happened. Let me start by saying this clearly, because it matters to the way I understand this experience even now. I do not believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the supernatural, spirits, or anything paranormal. I've always believed that everything has a logical explanation, even if that explanation isn't obvious right away. I'm the kind of person who needs things to make sense. I don't jump to fear easily, and I don't let my imagination run wild without a reason. That's why what happened still sits strangely with me, even years later. It was a completely ordinary day. Nothing unusual had happened before, and nothing felt strange in the house. I was sitting at my desk, focused on my computer, working on something that required my attention. The house was quiet in that normal, comfortable way you get when you're used to being home. I wasn't tired. I wasn't stressed, and I hadn't been watching or reading anything creepy that could have influenced my thoughts. My mind felt clear and grounded. While I was working, I heard the sound of someone walking outside my room. It wasn't faint or imagined. It was the clear, familiar sound of footsteps in the hallway. The floorboards made the same noises they always did, the kind of sounds you recognize when you've lived in a place long enough. It didn't startle me at first because it felt so normal. My immediate assumption was that my sister was home. I pushed my chair back and stood up, planning to see what she needed or just say hi. As I stepped out into the hallway, I saw someone walking away from me and toward the guest bedroom. The person looked exactly like my sister, same height, same build, same hair. It wasn't a blur or a shadow. It wasn't something I caught out of the corner of my eye. I saw her clearly, walking naturally, the way she always did. I want to stress this part, because it's important. This wasn't a trick of light or a vague shape that my brain filled in later. I saw a full figure moving normally, at a normal pace. There was nothing strange or distorted about it. It didn't feel scary in that moment. It felt confusing because I hadn't realized she was home, but nothing more than that. She walked into the guest bedroom and the door was open. I stood there for a second, trying to process why she hadn't said anything to me. Then I called out her name. Almost immediately, I heard a response. A clear, casual, "Yeah?" came from the direction of the guest room. It sounded exactly like her voice. Same tone, same familiarity, nothing unusual or echoing, or just a normal response, like she was distracted or busy with something. That was when my confusion deepened. I walked toward the guest bedroom, expecting to see her standing there, maybe looking for something or just hanging out. I stepped into the room, already forming a question in my head about when she got home. But when I entered the room, it was empty, completely empty. At first, my brain rejected what my eyes were telling me. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room, expecting her to step out from behind the door or say something like she was messing with me. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound, no one. That's when the unease started to creep in. Not fear exactly, but a deep, uncomfortable confusion. I walked back into the hallway, checking nearby rooms. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the living room. Empty. I checked the kitchen. Empty. Each room I checked made my chest feel heavier. The house was silent in a way it hadn't been before. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe she had stepped outside. Maybe she had gone into another room and I missed it. Maybe I misunderstood what I saw, but the more I thought about it, the less sense those explanations made. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. To be sure, I decided to search the entire house properly. I checked every room, every corner, every space someone could reasonably be hiding or occupying. I even checked places that would have been illogical, just to be thorough. When I finished and realized that I was completely alone, my heart sank. There's a specific feeling that hits you when reality doesn't line up with your memory. It's not panic right away. It's more like the ground beneath your certainty shifts slightly, and you suddenly don't feel as stable as you did moments before. That's what I felt standing there in the quiet house. Still trying to stay rational, I pulled out my phone and called my sister. When she answered, I asked her where she was. She sounded surprised by the question and told me she'd been staying at her boyfriend's place and hadn't been home at all that day. She hadn't stopped by. She hadn't come in and left. She hadn't been anywhere near the house. After I hung up, I just stood there for a while, replaying the entire event in my head. Every detail, the footsteps, the way she walked, the way her voice responded to me. I tried to pick it apart logically. Maybe my brain misfired. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. And maybe my mind created a familiar image because it expected one. The human brain does strange things sometimes, especially when routines are involved. But even with all that reasoning, something about it didn't sit right. Hallucinations don't usually come with sound, movement, and direct interaction all at once, especially for someone with no history of them. And yet, that's what it felt like. A complete, brief moment where my senses all agreed on something that wasn't real. Nothing like that has ever happened to me before, and nothing like it has happened since. I've never seen or heard anything that couldn't be explained. I've never experienced anything that made me question reality in that way again. And that might be the strangest part of all. It was isolated, singular, one moment, and then never repeated. Even now, I don't believe it was something supernatural. I still believe there is a logical explanation, even if I don't know what it is. Maybe my brain stitched together something familiar in a moment of distraction. Maybe there was a brief lapse in perception, Science doesn't have answers for everything yet, and I'm okay with that. But despite all my logic and skepticism, the experience changed something in me. Ever since that day, I felt a little uneasy being alone at home. Not terrified, not paranoid, just slightly on edge in a way I wasn't before. The house feels the same, but my awareness of silence feels sharper. When I hear footsteps or sounds now, I always pause for a moment longer than I used to. I don't think about it every day, and it doesn't control my life. But every once in a while, when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember how real it felt, how convincing it was, and how quickly certainty can disappear even when you believe firmly in logic and reason. Whatever happened that day, it reminded me of something important. Even when we trust our senses, even when we believe we understand the world, there are moments that slip through the cracks. Moments that don't fit neatly into our explanations. And sometimes, all you can do is accept that you experienced something strange, trust yourself, and keep moving forward. I was 16 years old at the time, and my parents were out for the night. Being home alone wasn't unusual for me, especially at that age, and it was something I was used to. Our house was familiar, predictable, and usually comforting. My grandmother lived on the same property, in a small granny flat just a short distance from the main house. She had lived there for years, and because of that, her presence had always felt normal, almost like part of the house itself. That night, I was already in bed. The lights were off, and I was lying on my side, half awake but relaxed, listening to the quiet sounds that come with nighttime. The house wasn't completely silent. It never really was. Old houses creak, pipes make noise, and the floorboards have their own language. None of that ever bothered me. At some point, I heard the sound of the back door opening. It was subtle but familiar. I immediately thought it was my gran coming over from her flat. She often did that, especially at night. She had bad breathing, and you could always hear her before you saw her. Her breathing had a rough, heavy sound to it, and it was something I'd known my entire life. Hearing it was as normal to me as hearing my parents' voices. I stayed still in bed, listening. I heard her footsteps on the floor, slow and careful, the way she always walked. Then I heard her stop outside my bedroom door. She did that every night she came over. She would pause there, listening, checking to make sure I was asleep. It was her way of looking after me, even though I was already a teenager. I didn't open my eyes or move. I didn't want to make noise or draw attention. I just lay there, pretending to sleep like I had done countless times before. After a moment, I heard her move on. The floorboards creaked as she walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. I could picture it clearly in my mind. I'd seen it so many times before that it didn't require any effort. She was probably heading to the cupboards to look for something to drink. She struggled with alcohol for much of her life, and late-night trips to the kitchen weren't unusual. Normally my parents would hear her and intervene, but they weren't home that night. I remember thinking briefly that maybe I should get up and check on her, but I decided against it. It didn't feel urgent. It felt routine. I told myself I would let it go just this once. I heard the cupboards open and close, the soft clink of something being moved, the faint sound of bottles shifting. Then more footsteps, more creaking floorboards. Her breathing echoed slightly in the quiet house, slow and labored. At one point, she passed my door again, and I heard her pause just like before. I stayed still. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't speak. I let the moment pass. Then I heard her walk back toward the door that led outside. The door opened. Cool air seemed to move through the house, or at least I imagined it did. Then the door closed again. Her footsteps faded as she returned to her granny flat. The house settled into silence. I lay there for a few minutes afterward, staring at the darkness. My thoughts drifted, and I started thinking about her life, about the things she had been through, about how complicated she was. We had been very close when I was younger. She wasn't just my grandmother, she was my friend. We talked a lot. She listened to me in ways other adults sometimes didn't. She had her flaws, many of them, but she had always cared about me deeply. As I lay there, my mind wandered through memories of her, small moments, conversations, times we laughed, times she struggled. It felt natural to think about her after hearing her move through the house like that. And then suddenly, it hit me. The realization came out of nowhere, sharp and overwhelming. It felt almost physical, like a stabbing pain in my chest or stomach. My body reacted before my mind fully caught up. My heart started pounding, and my breath caught in my throat. She had died 3 months earlier. The thought slammed into me with terrifying clarity. I sat up in bed, my entire body tense. My skin prickled, and a wave of cold fear washed over me. My mind raced as it tried to make sense of what I had just remembered. There was no confusion about it. There was no doubt. She was gone. She had been gone for months. Every sound I had just heard replayed in my head. The door opening, the breathing, the footsteps, the cupboards, the pause outside my door. None of it made sense anymore. My brain scrambled to find a rational explanation, but nothing fit. I knew the house. I knew the sounds it made. I knew the difference between imagination and reality. And what I had heard felt completely real. I forced myself out of bed, even though every instinct told me to stay where I was. My legs felt weak as I stood up. I turned on the light in my room, and the sudden brightness made everything feel even more exposed. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet, and too quiet. I started searching, slowly at first, then more urgently. I checked the kitchen. The cupboards were closed. Nothing was out of place. I checked the living room. Empty. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked every room, every corner, every space where someone could possibly be hiding or standing. I went back through the house again, and then again. I searched the house at least 10 times, maybe more. I lost count. Each time, I hoped I would find something that explained what I had heard. A window open, a door unlocked, something disturbed, but there was nothing. Everything was exactly as it should have been. The fear didn't ease, but it shifted. It became quieter, heavier. I sat on my bed afterward, the lights still on, trying to calm my breathing. My mind kept replaying the sounds, the sequence of events, the way everything had unfolded so naturally until that moment of realization. I didn't feel like I was in danger. That was the strange part. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel watched. I just felt shaken, deeply unsettled, like something fundamental had been disturbed. If it had been anyone else, I don't know how I would have reacted. I might not have slept at all. But because it was her, because of the bond we had shared, I felt something else mixed in with the fear. A strange sense of familiarity, almost comfort. That closeness we'd had when I was younger helped ground me. It helped me push through the fear enough to lie back down. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I managed to fall asleep. In the morning, the house looked the same as it always did. Daylight filled the rooms, making everything feel less threatening. Life went on. I didn't tell many people about what happened. I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding foolish or dramatic. Even now, I struggle to put it into words. I don't know what I heard that night. I don't know why my brain recreated those sounds so perfectly or why they felt so real. I don't know if it was memory, imagination, or something else entirely. I don't claim to have an answer. All I know is that I heard my gran that night as clearly as I had heard her so many times before. And I didn't remember she was gone until it was already over. That realization changed the memory forever. Even now, years later, I can still remember the exact sound of her breathing in the hallway, the way the floorboards creaked under her feet, and the pause outside my door. Some memories don't fade. They don't need to be explained to stay with you. They just exist quietly, waiting to resurface when the house is silent and the lights are off. This didn't happen to me directly, but it's a story my mom has told many times, and every single time she tells it, it still sounds just as disturbing. It took place before my parents had kids, back when they were younger and living in a house that already had its own strange energy. My dad was very into reptiles back then, snakes especially. He loved them, studied them, and treated them like any other serious hobby. To him, they were fascinating animals. To my mum, they were something she tolerated because she loved him. At one point, my dad owned a Burmese python. Not a small one, not the kind people casually keep in terrariums for fun. This was a serious animal. Even when it was younger, it was already massive. Eventually, it grew to around 17 feet long, which is when things got complicated. The story goes that the mafia actually forced him to give the snake to a zoo because it had become too dangerous to keep privately. Whether that part is exaggerated or not, the fact remains that the snake ended up at a zoo once it reached that size. Before that happened, though, the python lived in their house. It was kept in the basement inside a huge glass enclosure that my dad had specially set up. The cage took up a lot of space and was reinforced because of the snake's strength. My dad was careful with it. He respected it. Feeding time, however, was always intense. The python was usually fed rabbits, which my dad bought regularly from a local pet store. It wasn't pleasant, but it was part of owning a predator. My mom didn't like it, but she tried not to think about it too much. One day, things didn't go according to plan. My dad went to the pet store to get food for the snake and found out they were out of rabbits. Instead of waiting or going somewhere else, he decided to improvise. He bought a rooster. In his mind, it wasn't that different. Food was food, and snakes in the wild eat all kinds of animals. He brought the rooster home, carried it down to the basement, and placed it inside the glass enclosure with the python. The snake didn't react. That wasn't unusual. Snakes don't always eat right away. Sometimes they ignore food for hours or even days, especially if they're not particularly hungry. The rooster stayed alive inside the enclosure, pacing nervously, making occasional noises, but nothing happened. After a while, life went on as normal. The rooster was still there. The snake still hadn't eaten. Days passed. About a week later, my mom was home alone during the day. She had developed a terrible headache, the kind that makes light feel too bright and sound feel too sharp. She decided to lie down and take a nap, hoping sleep would help. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get in the middle of the day when everyone else is gone. She closed her eyes and drifted off, grateful for the silence. That was when the python decided it was hungry. From deep in the basement, a sound erupted that jolted my mom awake instantly. It wasn't a normal animal noise. It wasn't something she could immediately identify or rationalize. It was loud, piercing, and absolutely horrifying. A shrill, unearthly screech echoed up through the house, bouncing off the walls and filling the air. It sounded like pure panic, pain, and terror all mixed together. My mom shot upright in bed, her heart racing. The sound didn't stop. It kept going, over and over, relentless and desperate. She had no idea what she was hearing. All she knew was that it was coming from the basement, and it sounded like something was dying down there. Her mind jumped to worst-case scenarios immediately. She thought maybe an animal had gotten trapped, or something had broken, or some unknown creature had somehow gotten into the house. Every scream made her more panicked. Terrified and shaking, she grabbed the phone and called my dad at work. When he answered, she was nearly hysterical. She told him that there was some kind of creature shrieking in the basement, that it sounded awful, and that she didn't know what to do. She begged him to tell her what was happening, her voice breaking as another scream echoed faintly in the background. My dad, on the other hand, was completely calm. Without any urgency at all, he casually explained that the noise was coming from the basement because the python was finally eating. The rooster, he said, was being strangled by the snake. He said it like he was explaining something ordinary, like mentioning that the washing machine was running or the heater had turned on. My mum was horrified. The realization hit her all at once. That awful, screaming sound she had woken up to wasn't some mystery creature. It was a rooster being slowly crushed and killed by a 17-foot snake beneath her feet. The idea that this was happening directly below her, inside her own home, made her feel sick. She couldn't believe how casually my dad said it, as if it wasn't one of the most disturbing things imaginable. She didn't go back to sleep after that. Instead, she stayed upstairs, far away from the basement, listening as the sounds eventually stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. Knowing what had caused the noise made the house feel wrong, like the walls were holding onto the echoes of it. When my dad came home later, he acted like everything was normal. To him, it was just part of owning a snake. To my mom, it was unforgettable. Even years later, after the snake was gone and life had moved on, she would still talk about that day. The way she described the sound always made it clear how deeply it had affected her. It wasn't just scary, it was unsettling on a level that stuck with her, a reminder that something wild and dangerous had lived in their house, hidden just below the surface. And every time she tells the story, there's the same look on her face, a mix of disbelief, discomfort and lingering fear. Because once you wake up to that kind of sound and find out what caused it, it's not something you ever really forget. About a month ago, something happened that still sits in the back of my mind every time I turn the lights off at night. I live alone, and I've always been comfortable with that. I'm not the kind of person who gets spooked by creaks in the walls or shadows in the hallway. I've spent years by myself in this house without ever feeling truly afraid. But that night was different from the moment it started. The uneasiness crept in slowly. It wasn't tied to any sound or event. It was just a feeling, a heavy pressure in my chest that wouldn't go away. I was going through my normal routine, getting ready for bed, and the entire time I felt like I was being watched. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, just a constant awareness that something was off. I tried to brush it off. Everyone has anxious nights sometimes, but the feeling didn't fade. It got stronger. I'm a smoker, and usually I step outside for one last cigarette before bed. It's a habit I've had for years. That night I walked to the back door, hand already reaching for the handle, and stopped. Every instinct in me said, "Don't open that door." It was such a strong reaction that I actually stepped back like I'd touched something hot. I stood there in the kitchen, arguing with myself, feeling ridiculous. It was my own yard. I'd been out there thousands of times, but the idea of stepping into the darkness made my skin crawl. I locked the door again, even though it was already locked, and decided I could skip one cigarette. Instead, I went around the house, checking everything. I tested every window, every latch, every lock. I made sure the doors were secure, then checked them a second time because the unease wouldn't settle. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock in the hallway. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing was open. Everything was exactly as it should be. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. The silence felt thick, like it was pressing in from all sides. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't relax. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat. The darkness in the room felt deeper than usual. I kept imagining I heard tiny sounds, the kind you can never be sure are real. A soft tap, a faint shuffle. Every time I held my breath to listen, there was nothing. Just silence again. My mind kept circling back to the same thought. Something isn't right. I own a revolver that I keep for protection. I'm not paranoid about it. It usually stays secured where I know I can reach it if I need it. That night I got out of bed, walked to the closet, and brought it to the nightstand. I didn't take it out of the holster. I just set it beside me. Having it there eased the tension a little. I told myself I was overreacting, that tomorrow I'd laugh about how jumpy I'd been. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under and I fell asleep. Morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin lines across the room. For a few seconds I felt normal, that comfortable, groggy peace you get right after waking up. Then my eyes drifted to the dresser across the room and my stomach dropped. My pistol was sitting there, not on the nightstand where I had placed it, not half slid off the edge. It was neatly positioned on top of the dresser, several feet away from the bed. I sat up slowly, my brain struggling to make sense of it. Maybe I'd gotten up in the middle of the night and moved it without remembering. People sleepwalk. People do strange things when half awake. That explanation felt thin, but it was the only one I had. I got out of bed and crossed the room. The air felt cold against my skin. When I picked up the revolver, it felt lighter than it should have. My hands went numb. I opened the cylinder. Empty. All the bullets were gone. I stared at it, waiting for my mind to correct what I was seeing. I always keep it loaded. Always. That's the entire point. The empty chambers looked wrong, like teeth missing from a smile. My first thought was that I must have unloaded it in my sleep. The idea sounded insane, even as it formed, but I clung to it because the alternative was worse. I went to the closet and pulled out the box of ammunition. I knew exactly how many rounds were in there. I counted them every so often out of habit. When I opened the box, 5 shells were missing, the exact number that had been in the revolver. At that point, the fear hit me fully. It wasn't a distant unease anymore, it was sharp and electric. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to reconstruct the night in my head. I remembered placing the gun on the nightstand. I remembered lying down. After that, there was nothing until morning. No fragments of memory, no sense of getting up, just a blank space. I stood there holding the empty box, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Either I had done all of this in my sleep with perfect precision, or someone had been inside my house while I was unconscious. I checked the doors again. Still locked. The windows were closed and secured. There were no signs of forced entry. The house looked untouched. I forced myself to go through the motions of the morning because I didn't know what else to do. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. Every small sound made me flinch. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stage where something had already happened and I was the last one to understand it. Eventually I remembered the trash needed to go out. The normalcy of the task felt grounding. I tied up the bag and stepped outside into the daylight. The air was cool and smelled like damp leaves. For a moment, the sunlight eased the panic. Everything looked ordinary. Birds were chirping. A car drove by in the distance. The world was moving like nothing was wrong. I walked around the side of the house toward the garbage can. That's when I saw them. The bullets were scattered on the ground behind the house. All 5 of them lay in the dirt and grass, glinting faintly in the morning light. I stopped so abruptly the trash bag swung into my leg. My brain refused to process the image at first. They looked staged, almost deliberate, spaced a few feet apart, as if someone had dropped them one by one. I felt a cold wave travel from the back of my neck down my spine. I knew with absolute certainty that I had not been outside the previous day. I had come home from work, locked up and stayed in. The bullets hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. And even if I had somehow sleepwalked, how would I have unlocked the door, gone outside, scattered ammunition, come back in, relocked everything, and then neatly placed the empty gun on the dresser? The yard was quiet, too quiet. I felt exposed standing there like I was in the open with something watching from just out of sight. My eyes scanned the fence line, the corners of the yard, the shadows near the shed. Every dark space looked like it could be hiding someone. My breath came fast and shallow. I didn't pick up the bullets right away. I couldn't bring myself to step closer. A thought crept in that made my stomach twist. Whoever had taken them had been close enough to me while I slept to touch my weapon, close enough to stand over my bed. The image hit me with such force that my knees almost buckled. I imagined waking up to a stranger in the room, imagined what could have happened if they hadn't just taken the ammunition. The possibilities spiraled outward into darker and darker places. I grabbed the bullets with trembling fingers and backed toward the house, eyes never leaving the yard. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. When I got inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing. The house felt contaminated. Every room carried the echo of the question I couldn't answer. How did someone get in? I searched the place from top to bottom. Closets, under the bed, behind doors, the attic hatch. I half expected to find someone still hiding there, waiting. But the house was empty. No footprints, no open windows. No sign that anything had been disturbed except the gun and the missing rounds. I've replayed that night over and over since it happened. I've tried to build a logical explanation. Sleepwalking, stress, a memory lapse. But none of it fits cleanly. I've never sleepwalked before or since. I've never handled my gun unconsciously. And the image of those bullets lined up behind the house refuses to feel accidental. It felt intentional, like a message I couldn't read. What unsettles me most isn't the missing ammunition. It's the feeling I had before bed, that instinctive dread that kept me from stepping outside. The way my body seemed to know something was wrong, long before my mind could form the thought. It makes me wonder how often we ignore that quiet warning system inside us. I still live in the same house. I still sleep in the same room. But the nights are different now. I double-check the locks more carefully. I listen harder to the silence. And sometimes, when the house is perfectly still, I remember waking up to that empty revolver and feel the same cold weight settle in my chest. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I ever will. I only know that for one night, something entered my life without leaving a trace, took what it wanted, and slipped away, leaving me with a question that has never stopped echoing. For a long time I didn't tell anyone about this because it sounds like the kind of thing people immediately try to explain away. I still don't have an explanation myself, and that's the part that bothers me the most. If there was a simple answer, even a scary one, I think I'd feel better. Not knowing leaves this constant itch in the back of my mind that never really goes away. It started quietly. No big dramatic event, no loud crash in the middle of the night, just a morning like any other. I woke up, rolled over, and felt a sting along my neck. At first I thought it was just a pimple or an ingrown hair. I reached up to scratch it and my fingers came away sticky. When I sat up and looked at my hand, there was dried blood under my fingernails. That woke me up instantly. I went to the bathroom mirror and turned on the light. There was a clean, thin cut running across the side of my neck. Not a scratch like you get from brushing against something rough. It looked like a straight line, almost surgical. The blood had dried into a dark crust around it. It wasn't deep enough to need stitches, but it wasn't shallow either. It was the kind of cut that should hurt while it's happening. I stood there trying to remember hitting my neck on something. Maybe I'd scratched myself in my sleep, but my nails were short. I keep them trimmed down because I hate the feeling of long nails. I held my hand up next to the cut and tried to imagine making a line like that with my fingers. The angle didn't make sense. I told myself it was nothing. People do weird things in their sleep. Maybe I'd caught my skin on the edge of the nightstand or a zipper or something. I cleaned it. I put a bandage on it and went about my day. By the afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself it was a freak accident. Then it happened again. A few nights later, I woke up with a burning sensation in my leg. Not a cramp, not the dull ache of sleeping wrong. This was sharp and focused. I threw the blanket off and saw a thin, red line running along my thigh. Blood had soaked into the sheet beneath me, a small, dark stain that hadn't been there when I went to bed. The cut looked just like the one on my neck. Same depth, same unnatural straightness. My stomach dropped. I sat there staring at it, my heart pounding in my ears. I hadn't woken up during the night. I hadn't felt anything until that moment. There was no memory of pain, no half-remembered dream of hurting myself. Just a blank stretch of time between falling asleep and waking up bleeding. I stripped the bed and checked everything. The sheets were smooth, no tears, no sharp objects hiding in the fabric. I ran my hands along the mattress, the frame, the headboard. Nothing. My room was exactly the same as it had been the night before. Quiet, ordinary, safe-looking. That's when the fear started to settle in for real. It wasn't just the injuries. It was the idea that something was happening to my body while I was unconscious, and I had no control over it. Sleep is supposed to be a safe state. You close your eyes and trust that you'll wake up in the same condition. Suddenly, that trust was gone. I started dreading bedtime. Every night after that, lying in the dark felt different. The room seemed bigger, emptier, shadows stretched into shapes that made my brain work overtime. I'd lie there listening to the house settle, and every tiny creak sounding like a footstep. I told myself I was being dramatic, that there had to be a rational explanation. Stress, a skin condition, some strange sleep disorder. I Googled everything I could think of and found nothing that matched. The cuts kept appearing. One morning it was my arm, just below the elbow. Another time it was my shoulder. Always a single line, always clean, always with dried blood on the sheets like proof that it wasn't a dream. I started taking pictures of them because I was scared I'd convince myself I imagined it. Looking at the photos later didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. They looked deliberate. I checked my nails obsessively. I trimmed them even shorter. I wore soft gloves to bed one night, thinking maybe I was scratching myself without realizing. I woke up with a cut on my calf and the gloves still perfectly intact. That was the moment the situation crossed from unsettling into terrifying. I stopped sleeping well. I'd jolt awake at every little sensation, heart racing, convinced I'd caught something in the act. Sometimes I'd sit up and turn on the light just to reassure myself that I was alone. The room always looked harmless. Bed, dresser, door closed, nothing out of place, and yet I'd lie back down knowing that somehow, despite all of that, I might wake up bleeding again. I even questioned my own sanity. That might have been the worst part. It's one thing to be afraid of something external. It's another to wonder if your own mind is betraying you. I read about parasomnias, about people doing complex actions in their sleep, driving, cooking, or hurting themselves without memory of it. I clung to those stories because they were grounded in reality. If this was a disorder, at least it had a name. But there were details that didn't fit. The precision of the cuts, the locations, the fact that nothing in my bed could have caused them. I ran my hands over every inch of the frame again and again, looking for a hidden edge or splinter. Nothing, just smooth surfaces. The sheets became a source of dread. Every morning I'd pull them back slowly, bracing myself for what I might see. Sometimes they were clean, and I'd feel a rush of relief so strong it almost made me laugh. On those mornings, I'd tell myself it was over. Whatever strange phase I'd gone through had passed. Then another red stain would appear days later and drag me right back into that pit. I stopped inviting people over. I didn't want to explain the marks. I didn't want to see the look in their eyes when they tried to come up with a polite explanation. I started wearing long sleeves more often, even when it was warm. The secrecy made it feel heavier, like I was carrying around a private horror no one else could see. Nights stretched longer. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, afraid to fall asleep but too exhausted to stay awake. There's a special kind of vulnerability in that state, when your body demands rest and your mind fights it. Every time my eyes closed, I imagined waking up to another line carved into my skin. The weirdest part is that I never felt a presence. No footsteps, no breath in the dark, no sense of someone in the room. If I had, I could at least point to something and say that's it. Instead, there was just emptiness, silence, and then the evidence on my body in the morning. I tried changing my routine. New sheets, different pajamas. I even slept on the couch for a while, thinking maybe it was something about the bed itself. The cuts followed me, same pattern, same mystery. It didn't matter where I slept. After a while, fear turned into a dull, constant tension. It lived in my shoulders and jaw. I'd catch myself clenching my teeth during the day. I jumped at small noises. I started leaving lights on at night, telling myself it was just temporary. The glow made the room feel less like a void, but it didn't stop anything. What haunts me isn't the pain. The cuts hurt, but they're manageable. They heal. Skin closes. Scars fade. What stays is the question of what happens in the hours I can't witness. The idea that there's a gap in my awareness where something is happening, and I'm locked out of it. Every night when I lie down, there's a moment where I hesitate. A tiny pause before I let sleep take me. I run my fingers over old marks, tracing where lines used to be. Proof that this isn't just in my head. Something is happening. I just don't know what. I still wake up some mornings and check my body before I even get out of bed. Some days I'm clean and I feel lucky, like I've dodged a bullet. Other days I find a fresh line and the whole cycle starts again. Confusion, fear, that sick twist in my stomach. I wish I could end this with an explanation, a diagnosis, a discovery that ties everything up neatly, but I'm still in it. I still go to sleep not knowing what I'll wake up to, and that uncertainty has changed the way I look at the dark, at silence, at the simple act of closing my eyes. Sleep used to be a break from the world. Now it feels like stepping into a place where I don't have control, where something writes on my skin and leaves me to read the message in the morning. And the message is always the same. Something happened while you were gone. You just weren't there to see it. When my family moved from the West Coast to the Midwest, everything felt upside down before we even unpacked a single box. We were a huge family, loud and crowded, and always in each other's space, and finding a place that could hold all of us was nearly impossible. For a while it looked like we were going to be bouncing between relatives, but one of my uncles stepped in and offered us the other half of his duplex. It was an enormous old two-story house that had been split down the middle. Even then it felt too big and too old, like the kind of place that remembered the people who had lived there before. The first few nights, we were too exhausted to think about anything except sleep. Moving across the country with a pack of kids is chaos. Boxes stacked everywhere, mattresses on the floor, adults whispering about bills and work and school. But kids adapt fast. Within a day or two, we had already turned the basement into our territory. The basement was unfinished, cold concrete and exposed beams, with that dusty smell old houses have. To us, it was perfect. We dragged down toys, old chairs, anything we could sit on. Late one night, long after the adults thought we were asleep, a few of us crept downstairs with flashlights. It had to be around 1 or 2 in the morning. The house was quiet in that deep, heavy way only happens after midnight, when even the pipes seem to stop talking. We were playing around, daring each other to go deeper into the darker corners, when someone noticed a door none of us remembered seeing before. It was tucked into the far wall, small and plain, almost hidden in shadow. The flashlight beam shook as we pointed it at the handle. None of us had touched it before. None of us even knew it existed. That changed the feeling in the room instantly. A few minutes earlier, we had been laughing and shoving each other. Now, nobody wanted a step closer. We started daring each other to open it, whispering like the door itself might hear us. Every time someone took a half step forward, another kid would grab them and pull them back. It wasn't just fear of getting in trouble. It was that crawling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you something is wrong, even when you can't explain why. Eventually, we gave up. None of us were brave enough to touch it. We ran back upstairs and piled into our blankets, pretending to sleep, but listening to every creak of the house. The next morning, the story burst out of us at breakfast. We told my grandfather about the door all at once, or voices overlapping. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't tell us we imagined it. He just stood up quietly and told us to show him. The basement felt different in daylight, but not safer. The door looked even smaller with the lights on, like a mouth pressed shut. My grandfather walked straight to it without hesitation and opened it. Inside was a tiny room. No windows, no light except what spilled in from the doorway. The darkness inside seemed thick, like it absorbed the beam of the flashlight instead of reflecting it. I remember thinking the room looked deeper than it should have been, like the back wall was farther away than the outside dimensions allowed. My grandfather stood there for a long moment. His posture changed. He got very still. Then he said, in a voice I had never heard him use before, "You stay right there." He wasn't talking to us. The air in the basement felt heavy. None of us spoke. He shut the door slowly, turned, and told my father to come with him. They left the house in a hurry. We watched from the top of the basement stairs, whispering, wondering what we had done just by finding that door. They came back not long after with a chicken from a nearby farm. At the time, I didn't question it. My grandfather was a traditional shaman. Rituals were part of his life in a way that felt normal to us, even if we didn't understand them. But that day there was a seriousness to his movements that made even the adults quiet. He thanked the chicken softly before killing it. I remember that clearly. It wasn't rushed or careless. He treated the animal with respect. The blood was caught in a bowl, or dark and steaming in the cold basement air. He brought out his ceremonial hat, the one that covered his entire face, and his finger bells, one in each hand. The small metal chimes jingled softly as he moved. We were told to stay back. He opened the door and stepped inside the tiny room carrying the bowl. His voice began to rise in chants, words I didn't understand but felt in my chest. The sound echoed strangely, like the room was bigger on the inside. The bells rang in uneven rhythms, and we heard the bowl slide across the floor. It made a spinning, scraping sound that circled the space. None of us were allowed to look. We stood, frozen, listening. The chanting grew louder, more urgent. The echoes layered over each other until it sounded like more than one voice. The bowl kept moving, spinning, scraping, then suddenly it stopped. A silence dropped so hard it felt like pressure in our ears. My grandfather stepped out. The bowl was in his hands again. Inside it, soaked in blood, was a small hand-stitched doll wrapped in red twine. It looked old, not like a toy, like something meant for a purpose. The sight of it made my stomach twist. He struck a match and set the doll on fire right there in the bowl. The flames flared up bright and unnatural. He told my father to take it outside and not let the fire die until he reached open air. My father ran, holding the burning bowl away from his body. I remember being confused how blood could burn like that. The only thing that made sense was the doll itself feeding the fire. When my father left, curiosity pulled me closer to the door. I peeked inside the room. Even in the dim light, I could see blood smeared across the walls, splattered in wide arcs like something had been flung around violently. The concrete floor was streaked with dark stains. Later, we would clean it with flashlights, because the room never seemed to hold light properly. The blood looked almost black against the walls. No one explained anything to us. Life tried to go back to normal. Kids adapt, and fear fades faster than it should, but the house never felt the same. The basement became a place we avoided. Even walking past the stairs gave me a tight feeling in my chest. A few nights later, we woke to shouting and smoke. It was thick, choking, filling the hallway. My parents were yelling, running back and forth with buckets of water. The air burned my throat. My mother dragged us outside into the cold night while she called the fire department. We stood barefoot on the lawn, watching smoke pour out of the house. Then someone realized my grandfather was missing. My father didn't hesitate. He ran back inside. The wait felt endless. Every second stretched. I remember my mother crying, holding us close, the sirens still far away. When my father finally came out, he was carrying my grandfather on his back. The shaman hat was on his head. Even as a child, that detail felt wrong, in a way I can't fully explain. It was like seeing someone dressed for a ceremony in the middle of a disaster. My grandfather's body hung limp, his face hidden behind the mask. My father laid him on the grass and shook him until he came back to himself, gasping. The firefighters arrived and searched the house top to bottom. There was smoke damage everywhere, especially near the basement stairs and kitchen walls. But they couldn't find a fire, not a single active flame. They said it must have burned itself out, suffocated by lack of oxygen. The explanation sounded thin, even to my young ears. Years later, after my grandfather had passed away, I asked my father what really happened that night. He told me he found him in the basement hallway, standing in a deep trance, facing the wall near the small room. Not moving, not responding. Just there, as if listening to something on the other side. He said pulling him away felt like breaking through resistance, like the air itself didn't want to let him go. We never used that basement room again. The door stayed shut. Eventually we moved out, and the house became just another place in memory. But that night sits in my mind like a stone I still trip over. I can't explain the smoke without fire. I can't explain the doll. I can't explain the way the room swallowed light. All I know is that my grandfather saw something in that darkness and decided it needed to be dealt with. And whatever answered him didn't leave quietly. Even now, when I think about that tiny door and the sound of the bowl spinning in the dark, I feel the same chill I felt as a kid standing on those basement stairs, listening to chants echo from a room that felt bigger than it should have been. When I was a kid, I quickly realized that nightmares were something I could sort of control, at least to some extent. I'm not sure how I came up with it, but I discovered a kind of trick that seemed to work wonders for me. Whenever I found myself trapped in a dream that was frightening, whenever the panic started building in my chest and my mind screamed that something was wrong, I'd stop everything and start screaming as loud as I could. In the dream itself, I would just scream until my lungs burned, until my voice rattled my teeth, until it felt like the sound of the scream might actually break something in the dream. And most of the time, it worked. I'd jolt awake, heart hammering against my ribcage, soaked in sweat but safe in my room. The fear would fade like morning fog, leaving only the adrenaline and the memory of what I had just faced. For years, it became my go-to solution. I had nightmares like any other kid, especially in the early days when everything about the world was new and strange. Shadows on the walls seemed to move when I wasn't looking. Noises from the floorboards above my room sounded like footsteps pacing my hallway, and the wind outside would whistle through the cracks in my window frames in ways that sometimes made me jump. But I could face the dreams because I had my trick. I was fearless in my own way, at least while asleep, because I had learned how to take control, how to make myself safe. The screaming always worked, until one night it didn't. I was probably around 9 or 10 when this happened, although my memory of the exact age is blurry. I had gone to bed like usual, and my room dark except for the faint light of the street lamp outside my window that filtered through the blinds. The world outside was quiet, too quiet. I can remember feeling an almost electric tension in the air, that tight, prickling sensation in your skin that makes every hair stand on end, the kind of feeling that warns you something isn't right. My eyes closed, and within moments, I was back in a dream. But this one was different from the usual scary dreams. I was being chased by a figure that was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was humanoid, yes, but completely wrong in every way that mattered. Its body was swathed in black robes that seemed to ripple and stretch as it moved, and the hood of the robes hid most of its face, except for that terrifying mask-like visage. The face was pure white, smooth and expressionless, or yet somehow alive. It reminded me of a skeleton, but not like a cartoon skeleton or anything I could have seen in a book. It was real, impossibly real, and I felt its eyes staring straight into my soul. Every time I tried to run, it moved faster, its movements graceful and impossibly silent, its presence pressing into my chest like a weight I couldn't push away. I felt the panic rising. My little heart was pounding like a drum in my ears. The scream trick came to mind automatically, that reflex I had practiced for years. I froze in place in the dream, took a deep breath, and opened my mouth as wide as I could. I screamed, and I woke up. I gasped, my chest heaving, my throat raw. Relief washed over me in waves. I thought I was safe. I thought the trick had worked as always. I had made it through the nightmare unscathed, untouched by the darkness that had pursued me. I lay there for a few moments, listening to the normal nighttime sounds of my room, the faint ticking of a clock, the soft hum of the heater. Everything seemed fine. I was safe. Then I fell asleep again. I don't know how long it had been, seconds or minutes, but the moment I drifted back into sleep, the dream returned. And this time, it didn't just return, it was waiting. I was back in the same room, the same darkness around me, but now it felt heavier, like the air had turned to lead. I could sense it before I saw it, a presence that was patient but utterly malevolent, waiting for me to make a mistake. And then I saw it. It was standing at the foot of my bed, unmoving at first, and the black robes seemed to stretch impossibly, brushing the floor and yet never collecting dust or wrinkles. Its face, that smooth, white, skeletal mask, was looking at me. Not just looking, but studying me, reading me, knowing exactly what I was thinking before I could even think it. It was aware of my little trick, the screaming trick, the thing that had saved me countless times. and I could feel it mocking me with its presence. A voice, impossibly deep yet chillingly calm, filled my mind. Not spoken out loud, but somehow it was audible, as if my own thoughts were being turned against me. It said, "That won't work this time." I froze. My body refused to move. My stomach sank. I felt a coldness crawling up my spine, a sensation that made every nerve in my body tingle as if I were being electrocuted by fear. My eyes were wide, staring at the figure that now seemed even more alive, more real than anything I had ever encountered in my waking life. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything to escape, but my body betrayed me. And then the humiliation of pure, childish terror hit me. I panicked, fully, completely, and something in me betrayed itself in a way that was mortifying. I lost control. I don't think I need to go into details, but suffice it to say that the fear I felt was beyond anything I had ever experienced. I woke up, truly awake this time, shaking, sweating, heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst from my chest. I didn't move for a long time. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it had all been a dream. But it didn't feel like a dream. The weight of that presence, the voice in my head, the realization that my own trick had failed, it stayed with me long after I had woken. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, my body rigid, my mind replaying the image of the black-robed figure and its skeletal face over and over, unable to shake it. After that night, I stopped using the screaming trick altogether. I couldn't rely on it anymore, couldn't trust it to save me. It wasn't just a trick, it was a fragile sense of control, and that control had been shattered. I started to sleep differently, with the lights on, with a pillow over my head, sometimes even keeping my parents' door open just to feel the slightest sense of safety. The experience affected me for years. Every nightmare I had after that carried a shadow of that night. Even now, decades later, I can feel the echoes of that fear if I allow myself to recall it. My brain, which had once been a reliable ally against the darkness of my own mind, or had shown itself to be cruel, capable of twisting safety into vulnerability, confidence into terror. It was a lesson I never forgot. Sometimes even the tricks that work best fail, and sometimes the things you think you understand about fear are nothing compared to what fear can truly be. I still have dreams, I still get scared, but I never again thought I could control it completely. The world inside your mind is vast and strange, and sometimes the monsters inside don't follow your rules. And that night, with the black-robed figure and the skeletal face, I learned that in the most absolute way possible. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.